Hello, John.
Hello, Alma.
So today we're going to talk about the deregulation of drugs. Ireland has a serious drug problem, and for some reason they've decided to deregulate or decriminalize drugs so that maybe that people can
Right.
buy them. Okay. Now, a friend of mine, before we even start, has done great work on this. Darren J. Pryor. He has interviewed so many people. If people want to see the real experts talking. He has a channel, Darren J. Pryor, type in
Lovely.
decriminalizing drugs, and then you'll see it then from the health professional's point of view. Okay, but we're going to talk about it, from a bishop's, and the bishops are saying that this is correct, which is not. So go ahead there, John.
Yeah. Well, the first I knew about it in some ways was in this week's Irish Catholic, and it kind of doesn't support in some ways the bishops. And a recently ordained bishop, Reuter, who's an auxiliary bishop with Archbishop Eamon Martin in Armagh, the auxiliary bishop. But he was quoted, and the bishops are supporting this decriminalisation of drugs, and it has come under criticism because um, drugs changes them. Drugs are an addiction, much the same way as alcohol. The abuse of alcohol is an addiction, and some people suffer from it, so they have to try and be eventually join the like of Alcoholics Anonymous to deal with it. And there is a thing called Narcotics Anonymous with the same principles as Alcoholic Anonymous with 12 steps. You hand your life over to God, and you do it on a daily basis, which is the only way to do anything. But the business of the bishops supporting this dubious effort on the part of the government, because whatever the thinking behind it, it's people that indulge in drugs are pathetic in some ways. They are seeking something to sort of deal with the anxiety that they suffer from, and it has eventually the opposite effect. To become dependent on it and neurotic, and they often have suicidal thoughts. The
There,
drug addiction leads to suicide, and in some countries, with whatever mix that has occurred, a tremendous amount die. In the United States, I think 100,000 or more, some big amount of all social classes, not just all social classes, die and die a terrible death.
you do. I just
You
want to go
know,
back
reading
there.
and writing.
I just want to
Yeah,
go back there, John. Just okay, you said they're pathetic. They're not really pathetic at all. They're what they are is basically these are people, as you say, they had problems maybe with anxiety or depression, and they were looking for an escape, and then they became addicted. The sad fact is that
that's right.
if you look around Dublin City, and I only seen it the other day going through Crumlin, right? You'll see a lot of
Yes,
very, very thin anorexic women, okay, with bruises all over their face. And I tell you what's happened here now, okay? Um, I see it like every week I go to Crumlin. I drive through it, unfortunately. But the thing is, so what happens is they're forced to beg. There's so many Irish beggars now on the streets because of drugs. It's incredible. An
okay.
epidemic, whatever. The thing is, there's so many of them. What's happening with the women? You'll see lovely, pretty-looking girls, and they're skin and bone. Okay, they're forced to beg, and then when they don't have the money, they 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 blacken their face. The drug dealers beat them up, okay, and they're covered in huge bruises, okay. I've seen two women in the last week in Crumlin begging to pay back the drug debts, okay, and it's very
My God,
tragic, and
it is tragic.
it's very, very, very sad, you know. So
Goodness,
that's drugs, but supporting the decriminalization of drugs is completely wrong because one drug leads to another, and if you start
it
encouraging
does.
that, you're going down the wrong road, you know.
That's right. Now, when they are going to decriminalise it, where are these drugs going to be available? Are they actually going to have clinics to supply drugs to people
Yeah,
and that
this is
kind
the
of
thing.
thing? You
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
know where it's going to lead. And they have done various things that have been counterproductive. in what they have inflicted on people. And this business of being supported by bishops, it seems a very strange decision, because, as you rightly say, the evidence is there, what you see. And funny enough, I mentioned something about my visit to Limerick. What I saw down there was beggars, far too many. And it
Mm,
could be for the very same reason that you noticed in Crumlin. And these handsome women, probably boyfriends, getting them hooked. And once you sort of go down that road, then you're a potato. Your life is ruined,
it is.
and you suffer because the people that supply drugs do it first of all by giving you them for nothing
Yeah.
to
That's
get you
it.
hooked, and
Absolutely.
then when you're hooked, you're under their control, and they are quite ruthless.
They are. So those
So
so the woman
it behoves,
the woman
yeah,
that I seen in Crumlin, okay, she was you could see that she hasn't lost her sense of dignity. And I tell you what she used to do, right? So there was one man whose poor face is all yellow, he's skin and bone, and he's been begging for the last couple of months in Crumlin, you know. But then a woman came along and she was very, very well dressed, very took care of herself
yeah,
the whole lot. But she used to wait outside the spar shop, sitting down. Okay, she'd get a coffee until he was finished his begging because she didn't know him and she was waiting for him so she could take the begging spot. Okay. So what happened in the end anyway was that they shared the begging spot. And then what happened was when she was beaten up, her face was black and blue. It was awful looking. And she then sat beside him for protection. So they're both begged together
right.
now over in Crumlin, you know, up in Kilmainham. It's the road there.
It's a terrible sight. Yeah,
South
I
Circular
think
Road.
that's what you're seeing is the reality.
The reality.
uh,
Yeah.
and it's in that area. But if you, I wonder, is this the reason for this new Archbishop in Dublin wants to change the cathedral from the Dublin One where it is, because apparently Dublin One is a no-go area with criminals and this business of drugs. That they're probably going into church to try and rob whatever they can rob in the churches or rob people in the churches.
Hmm.
So I think that's why churches are closed. I noticed in Limerick, the church in the O'Connell Street that was always open in my time, and now it's closed seemingly
Yeah,
all the time, except for it's open for mass. So there has to be a reason for it, and that must be the reason.
not
Now I thought it
necessarily.
was some other reason, but that must be the reason. And the same with the cathedral, the Catholic cathedral up not too far from the Protestant cathedral, which is St. Mary's, and I said something about that before. And and it's a cathedral that was built in the 1100, it was founded in 1100s, and it was a Catholic cathedral for centuries until Reformation. So I'm just mentioning that the business of them being closed, especially the Catholic cathedral up in the street, because that's where they make for. They don't make for the Protestant churches because they won't get, they're closed anyway. But St. Mary's in Limerick is open for visitors, and so they would have security. So these ones can't get in. And they would be of that caliber. And but I think the Catholic churches are at risk because they were always open, and
Mhm.
in various places they're still open. But in the like of cities, they're closed. And I think this is why the Archbishop wants to move the church to St. Andrews and Westland Row. He's been criticised for that decision by various people. But the thing is, the reality is that there's Dublin One is nearly no go and dangerous with
Yeah,
drugs
the thing about
and people that are dependent.
yeah, so if Dorset Street in Dublin, okay, I would have grown up in Phibsborough, so the thing about it was Dorset Street anyway. If I go back last year when I was doing a lot of work down that area, it's there's about I would say 10 beggars down in Dorset Street, okay, and they're all Irish, okay, and these are all drug addicts. Now, what's nice about look, the thing about it is it's better that they're begging rather than robbing people, you know. But begging is quite lucrative, you know, and you got there's one man down there. He's an he's what I would call the old style, old fashioned beggar. He's got a big curly head of hair on him, and he's not a drug addict, but he loves his booze, and he's very, very respectful, and he always has lovely leather shoes on him. Okay, but he says he has a suit that's a little bit shabby, but he always tries his best, and he's always very, 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 very respectful, and I really like him, you know. But then if you move further down Dorset Street, okay, down by the canal, you get what you get down there is there's a few huts down the Royal Canal there in Crossguns Bridge, and you got a guy who had to call the police one day about it because there's a guy there, he's a drug dealer, and he brings about 12 lost souls, and they look like death. Okay. He brings them down the canal and he brings them to the back of the huts, and then he waits. He has a bicycle with him. He waits for the drug dealer to come with the drugs, and then he dishes out the drugs, and then they hand over what they have, you know. And they look like something from the famine. They looked like death. It was
Correct.
terrible.
God help them. It is, isn't it? And there are organisations, believe it or not, dealing with some of them and trying to rehabilitate them. And the Merchants Key is one group there, and they have a drug rehabilitation in Glasnevin or up that neck of the woods. In I think up there, they have one there, and then one down in Tullow in County Carlow, and it's for these ones that have drug addictions and to rehabilitate them, and they are fairly successful by and large, and it's good. But for bishops to support this business of decriminalisation, they must be clueless, and but they couldn't shouldn't be clueless because the churches are closed in cities because of that kind of problem with the drugs.
Yeah,
And Dublin one was quoted as being a danger zone, even out as far as the North Strand, which was very respectable in my time, houses there and very respectable people living in them. But obviously, it must be a danger there now. And I noticed in Limerick, I think I mentioned that it was dangerous, and could be accosted. And these must be poor unfortunates that are dependent on drugs because. Right enough, when I looked at them, they were like tin and the rest of it. And that's an example, isn't it?
it is, you know. And the thing about it, a lot of them would have like a dual diagnosis. You know, they'd have some of them would have say they have mental health problems, or else they have mental health with alcohol and drugs, or they might have one or the two. You know, so it's quite complex their condition. There is a new organization in Ireland called Dual Diagnosis Ireland, which tackles both the drugs, the mental health, and the alcohol, you know. Um, so it's quite a complex area, and you know, there's no quick answer.
Oh, well, by the way, the state is doing this decriminalisation. Now, it's a very peculiar thing. I don't know what prompts them to do that and the bishops to support it because what way then are they going to get the drugs in the same way? And when the experience that people have with them is that they have maybe mental issues, but there could be more psychological because people now, because of the lack of the spiritual development of young people, by the state interfering with that aspect of the spiritual development of people in schools that they supply money to, like by way of the teachers. This is why you have schools now that have been trying to be started by people without any business from the government. One in Cork, a matter of fact, is in the thing there, and they're also providing this facility for homeschooling with proper facilities and that. So I mentioned that as being children at risk in the school environment because a friend of mine is a secondary school teacher, noticed that in Finglas in Dublin, and they would be in the playground to keep some order. But he was told that there was ones going down to a corner where they were getting drugs and not to interfere.
This is the thing. This is the thing.
because it could be dangerous. And
So
so that was years ago in Hartstown and Finglas. So like these were ones that were in secondary school. And I think it affects all classes. Now, I think people might have psychological problems. Some might have mental, but I think there's a psychological problems mostly, because if you're not getting a spiritual business at home, which maybe they're not, then you're at risk because you need something outside yourself to try and do it. And the spiritual way is the best way because then you're nourished and you don't have that dependence.
the thing is,
We all took a drink in our time, and I took a drink in my time, and maybe more than I should have. And it was maybe the company I was keeping, which is not a good thing. You have to watch the company
no, the
as
thing is,
well.
I
So
think,
because
look,
yeah,
I think speaking of company, it's a good topic you went moved on to there because I think what you have to do with drug users, okay, drug addicts and alcoholics is you have to take them completely out of the environment, okay? But then
right,
you almost have to put them on an island with all the professional services to dry them out, right? Okay, give them a new life, okay?
that's right. Yeah,
Give them some kind of religious substance, okay? And
that's right.
rehabilitate them, get them off drugs, make sure they're completely dry or drink whatever it is, and then bring them back to their families. I think that's the only way you can do it. This idea of letting them roam around the streets while they're being treated, it doesn't work.
Oh God, yes, no, no, God help them. And these ones that sleep rough are probably suffering from the same thing,
Mm,
alcoholism and drug addiction and all that. Now, the thing is that the homes could be not a good thingamajigs because some of the homes can be not a safe haven, if you know what I mean. They mightn't be what they should be. So you have to be careful there, quite frankly.
mm, mm,
And I think they need to be rehabilitated and in the sense of joining the like of Narcotic Anonymous and being able to deal with it on a daily basis because they're always liable to offend again, especially if they're anywhere near where they were subjected to pressure.
mm.
So that sort of thing needs to be. It's a long. It's a process needing TLC, tender love and care, if you know what I mean, and that
Yeah.
they can be brought out of the environment where companions and all the rest of it are probably a factor and their environment changed and joining something when they're dried out, like Narcotic Anonymous, and living in safe environments that they're not going to be subject to this pressure, not in an area, excuse me, where they're liable to be approached by these drug pushers and given it for nothing. I sure to do you no harm, this type of thing. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine that I was talking to there when I was up in Dublin there this week, his daughter is a secondary school teacher, very responsible and very responsible, and they were brought up in not in a Catholic home, but in a very respectable where they were brought to church and all the rest of it, and and they were good. But and they used to be doing charitable work. But this daughter married a person that was from Scotland that had been a drug pusher and dealer, and also was in jail. But he was rehabilitated in Wicklow, although he's from Scotland. And then he was in a home then when he was rehabilitated in Greystones, and this one, more or less, and another one, shall we say. And they got married, but he and they have two children, and one was needing some kind of treatment every month. But suffice to say that his wife, they were married for 10 years, and he was great helped by her and the family, and given jobs, and then I got a degree in the social thing because he was dealing with handicapped people, and some of them were ex drug addicts in these homes that they have, and he would have had a great salary. But anyway, she found when he was down somewhere during a holiday home, it was difficult. He was being a bit difficult. He wasn't as good a husband as he should be, and she saw that he was asleep and whatever, and she saw in the drawer the evidence of drugs. So she came away that night to go to her father and mother with the two children. And he cleared back to Scotland. He eventually was working for the Jesuits, believe it or not, after leaving the thing and being well paid. But once a drug addict, always a drug addict, and he's gone back to Scotland. And he
Hmm.
comes over periodically, apparently, to take the kids out, and they still think he's good.
Yeah,
Now, it's a very dangerous thing. And I said to my friend, I said, you want to tell her to be careful because he'd be unpredictable.
that's the thing.
Um, so there you are. And apparently now he's unemployed. He had another job in Scotland. This is only recent.
Yeah,
And so I said she'd want to have something up between her ears, irrespective of what the children think. She's responsible now. And I
that's it.
wouldn't trust that guy as far as a throw him. You know what I'm saying?
I
He
know
was
what you
in jail.
mean. Yeah, okay, okay, okay.
So
He's got
I'm
a
just
few
mentioning that
problems.
as the danger. You want to be very careful, and people that have that problem want to move well away from where they were and not go near their families, no matter whether they're good families, middling, or whatever, and be in safe zones where they can have help available. It
Hmm.
costs money, but it's better than all this business of what's going on,
That's
isn't it?
it. It is indeed.
And dealing with given decriminalizing this is not the way to do it. And the bishops definitely are astray. So
That's
there
it.
you are.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you very much, Oliver.